concerned with everything that's related to legal education and the legal profession. So there are some of us that work in the pre-law space. So as you figure out if law school is the right decision for you, we help you figure out the financial aspects, what school might be the best fit for you. Some of those questions that may not be top of mind or intuitive for you, we want you to think about that as far as your return on investment. And once you're in law school, you're getting a great legal education, but we have a financial literacy program because we understand that you have short-term and long-term goals that are related to your finances. And then once you graduate, we are experts in loan repayment and public service loan forgiveness. So we help you navigate and create a strategic approach to loan repayment. And if you're interested in public interest, public service loan forgiveness. So that's really who we are. We have an advocacy team in DC. We do a ton of research. We partner with Gallup because we really want to know, who's going to law school. And if you go, are you happy that you did it? And also things like how much people are making once they enter into the field. So that's a quick rundown of who we are. Also, best thing, we're free. We're a nonprofit. Nothing that we do for you all is ever going to cost you anything. So resources, webinars, anytime we come on campus, which we hope to do eventually in the near future. Yes. But so you don't have to worry about the first phone call or whatever being free and then you have to pay. We're completely free for you.
Which is absolutely mind-boggling to me with the amount of resources that y'all offer. It's just awesome. It's just awesome. So, so once again, the way this is going to roll, guys, is that we're going to keep everybody muted. And what I'd like for you to do is go ahead and use your chat feature to ask Teria some questions. I think what I'll do to kind of get your juices flowing, there's one that I particularly want to know about. And I think it's a good starting question for, for our time together today. And that is, I would love to know what kind of the timeline is for applying to graduate school. So when you look at a calendar year and you look at the recruiting cycle and the application cycle, tell us a little bit about that timeline and kind of when do I start thinking about it all the way through to, getting accepted. So I'll kick it off that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are things that you can start doing even in your freshman year as far as figuring out if law school is going to be the best decision for you. So, you're researching law schools, you're taking some logic and reasoning courses, you're taking classes in English because law school is a lot about writing as well. So that is the exploratory phase. So freshman, sophomore year, you're figuring out if this may be right for you. You're going to events that Leslie is doing where she brings in law school reps. You go to law fairs and you get some information. Your junior year is really when you start preparing. If you've gotten past that question of is law school right for you? And if you say yes, that's when you start thinking about LSAT prep, when you're going to take the exam, because we want to stress time is important when it comes to applying to law school. It may not be, once again, intuitive. We think sometimes that they say the assignment's due on Friday by midnight. If we get it in at 11:59, we're good to go. Not the same process for law school. So junior year, trying to take the exam as early as possible, but still giving yourself adequate time to prepare. We say 2 to 4 months is what you should be doing to prepare for the LSAT. And then to get that score in. And we understand sometimes you have to sit and feel the exam, and you may want to take it a second time or maybe even a third time, but giving yourself that window, because law school is a rolling admissions. So that application typically will open around September. So we advocate that you get your applications in by October 31st, at the latest Thanksgiving, because you want to give yourself the opportunity to be seen early. And we say it's very much like a movie theater. It was a popular movie recently, let's say Endgame. So, if you go to an old school theater, not the fancy ones where you pick your seats, but you have a 7 o'clock showing. If you show up at 6 o'clock, there's simply more seats available for you to sit down, as opposed to if you get there at 6:45, 6:50, there just are less seats. We also advocate that for if your LSAT and your undergrad GPA might be a little bit below the medians, those numbers that schools actually advertise for their rankings. it's also very important that you get your application in early. So that time frame for applying junior year is very much about the prepping phase, understanding how you're preparing for the LSAT, where you might want to apply, but that becomes solidified once you get those numbers. And then your senior year, September, October, we're making sure we're getting those applications in.
So since the group is kind of small, okay, perhaps it would be if you guys, if y'all fit, welcome Lauren and welcome Peyton. So we have Trevor, Wesley, and welcome Wesley, Peyton, Lauren, and Robert. So since the group is pretty manageable right now, you know, Teria, are you comfortable with folks asking questions verbally?
Absolutely.
Okay, alrighty. So let me go ahead and unmute everybody, and I'll let you guys go ahead and ask your questions verbally of Teria. And if you get stuck, you know, I'm happy to help or whatever. So the floor is yours. Whoever wants to pipe in can pipe in.
Real quick, I had a question. If you have thoughts on our university, like many others, moves to pass fail as an option for classes. Do you have feelings on like what that would look like for our admissions?
Yeah, we have heard that feeling a lot from students right now. And the great thing is that we've heard from admissions persons that we understand that this is a very unique time that we're in. So everyone is pretty much very similar situated. Now, the hard part is that if you were waiting for some of these grades to help boost your GPA to where you wanted it to be, so that's a little bit more challenging, but the pass fail we've heard across the board is not going to be that consequential because most people are in a very similar situation.
So on a law school application, besides having a good GPA and a good LSAT, what do they look for in terms of, do they look for a specific major, or do they like hearing that you've done a certain thing, or like what would put you over the top compared to the rest of the applicants?
Yeah, so it's not so much about what major you are. They do, as far as your academic profile, they want to see that you have challenged yourself. So not that you've taken basket weaving for 4 semesters in a row, or I used to work at Ohio State. Students love the history of beer for some reason. So of course, take things that interest you, but take things that are also going to challenge you so they know that you're ready for the academic rigor. And so we also say there's 2 categories that law schools are looking for. They want to see that you can do the work, be successful academically, but they also want to know what kind of flavor you're going to add to the school. How are you going to be different as far as your perspective and your outlook and your experience? So they want to see that you've joined social groups and you're a part of student leadership. So what can you add to the student body that another applicant can't? So absolutely think of it from an academic perspective, but also think about it from the perspective of what you can add. What makes you different than all of the other applicants?
Trevor, did you have a question?
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay, sorry. For the application process, how do you, for letters of recommendation, how do you kind of feel about professors in terms of that? Do you feel that's a good source to go to, or would you try branching out and having, say, maybe 1 professor or 2 professors and somebody else, or what would you kind of recommend?
So that's a great question also. Professors are a little bit of the gold standard when it comes to letters of recommendation because they can speak about your academic performance in the classroom. Now, given the fact that some of you may decide to take a little bit of time off before you go to law school, that may become a little bit harder. And let's be honest, some people don't make, close connections with their professors. So we say, think about someone that can speak to your attributes that are, well suited for law school, who can talk about you being a good writer, who can talk about you being a leader, Who can talk about you overcoming some challenge or adversity? Because all of those attributes are going to be important as you go into law school. So yes, professors, if you can have a professor write a letter, that is great. That's not always the situation. So find someone that can speak about the abilities that are going to make you a great law student. So if that is going to be a former supervisor, if that is a advisor at your school, whoever that person is. And sometimes people think, well, should I have a judge or a lawyer write my letter? Not necessarily. It's not always about their title. It's about what they can offer about you. And you want someone who is going to rave about you. I sometimes say it's the grandma standard. You know how your grandma tells you about you to all of her friends? You want someone to rant and rave about how great you are, and that's what you want your recommender to do as well.
Building on that question, would you agree that sending your personal statement with or discussing that with your recommender, would you recommend that? I've heard that that's a good step to take because they can personalize it even further.
Absolutely. You want them to know what your motivations are for going to law school. What makes you excited? What are those experiences that led you up to that point? So whatever you can give them to help them make a better letter for you. I mean, that's also resumes. Sometimes calling them to make sure that they are as excited about writing your letter as you are about having them write their letter is good as well. We can't always tell language or body language from an email. So sometimes, go in person or hear their voice to see if they really are excited about writing that letter for you, because you do not want a lukewarm letter. You want something that's really going to make you stand apart. So yes, anything you can provide them. Also, if it's not a professor, maybe it's a former coworker or supervisor, remind them of what projects you worked on together. Even for the professor, if it's some work that you did for them, maybe it's a paper you wrote, go ahead and give that to them as well so they can remember and familiarize themselves with who you are again.
Teria, I've got a question for you. So quite frankly, it's been, I've never applied to law school before, and it's been a long time since I applied to grad school. Could you talk a little bit about the actual kind of process? Because back in the old, I can remember visually, with the FedEx, little envelope in my hand going to the FedEx box and dropping it in, that this is way back in the late 90s, right? And so that doesn't happen anymore. And so, for example, Trevor had some great questions about the recommendations. And I'm wondering, so nowadays recommendations are uploaded to the LSAC website. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's even been a long time since I've gone to law school, so the process is even different now. So you do have a credential assembly service, so that is created through LSAC. It is about $200, so it's a little bit pricey, and it's $45 for every report that you send to a law school. So the credential assembly service, kind of from the name, what they do, they put everything that's in your application together. So LSAC will have your score, of course, so they'll send it out to the schools that you indicate that you want the score sent to, but then they will also gather your letters of recommendation, your personal statement, any other materials that you want to add into that application, like maybe your optional essays, a diversity statement, whatever you're writing, and then they'll send that off to the schools that you indicate you want your application sent to. So it's all electronic. We're not going to the post office for anything. And so you also won't send anything directly to the law school unless they specifically request that, which is very unusual. Everything will be done through the credential assembly service.
Thank you.
On somewhat of a similar note, what do you think a manageable amount of schools to apply to is?
That's a really good financial question because some of the applications can be a little bit pricey. However, if you receive a waiver from a law school and you receive a significant amount of them, apply to as many schools as you want to. Now, that does become a little bit tricky from a time perspective. So financially, you can figure out how many schools you have the resources to apply to. Also, just about that waiver again, I always say Leslie does a fantastic job of bringing in law schools for the law fair. So if you go to law schools, you have a conversation, you think you're interested in going. Now, don't make a straight beeline for the fee waiver, but definitely ask them if you're interested, if they have waivers for you. So that's a good way to accommodate that cost. But then it does become a time perspective because, of course, personal statements, they tend to be around like the same guidelines, but they may not. So we say you should, revise your personal statement 3 to 4 times. And that can be time consuming. And then any optional essays that you want to do as well, that's another 3 to 4 revisions. So you really want to think of it from a financial perspective, but also from a time perspective and what you can fit in and still, so it doesn't hurt that timeline for your application because we still are aiming before Thanksgiving.
Exactly. Yeah, and she brings up a good point. I can tell you guys that when students begin to come in, usually over the summer and into the fall, it happens throughout the year actually, but one of the things that I remind students of is that you're coming for your personal statement for law school, and it's going to be several iterations before you're finished. It's not going to be like you're going to come and meet me one time and then you're going to be good to go and you'll run off. Usually I remember seeing students 3 and 4 times before they were really satisfied. So all that takes time, like Teria said. So it's important to remember that time frame because it is time consuming. So yeah.
Absolutely. And use Leslie, absolutely. It's better to have a second or set of eyes on that personal statement than just thinking like, I can look at this myself and turn it in.
Mm-hmm. And another resource that we have on campus that I'll plug real quick is the Writing Center. So don't forget about that, you guys. And yes, they are doing virtual, reviews of documents while we're out. So while we're off campus rather. So yeah.
Does the Writing Center, if I can remember correct, do they work with alumni?
I don't believe so. I don't
Okay.
believe so. We do for free. The Career Center does for free.
Okay.
Not the Writing Center. Yeah. Uh-huh. To get another legal pad. Do you guys have any more questions about the application? The floor is yours. This is your time. So
I'll jump in again.
sure, Robert, go right ahead.
So this is a question I've had for a little while. And obviously it's going to depend a little bit depending on the school. But if you had to give a percentage to different things, like a percentage weight to GPA, percentage weight to LSAT, to extracurriculars and that sort of thing, could you give a breakdown of that?
That's a good question. Yeah, I am going to give you the lawyer's answer. It depends, but let me put it in this framework. Merit-based scholarships are heavily weighted on undergrad GPA and LSAT score. So if we're just talking from a money perspective, it's more weighted on the undergrad GPA and LSAT. Your ability to get in, they do have a holistic review because they do, of course, want to make sure that you're looking well from an academic, can you be successful, but also they want to have a more diverse student body as well. So from that perspective of just getting in, I feel like it's more equated, maybe like a half and half situation, but just from a merit-based scholarship perspective, a lot heavier on the undergrad GPA and LSAT score.
In terms of scholarships, what or how much do colleges or law schools typically offer, I guess you could say?
That's another it depends question, but we have a fantastic resource. It's called Explore JD. So if you just go, it's the X, so no E, just XPLOREJD. And it gives you, depending upon the schools that you choose, it will let you know the percentage of students that received scholarships, and also lets you know the average amount of those scholarships. So, you know, the schools that are more well endowed, they tend to be able to give more in scholarship resources. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a lower cost overall than those schools that are not as well funded and resourced. But yeah, Explore JD is a really good resource to find out the average amounts and the percentages of students that are getting scholarships.
Thank you.
And can you repeat that that website again, Teria?
Yes, Explore JD, so XPLOREJD.com.
Got it. Awesome.
I know the process has changed some since you have went through law school, but is there anything different that you would do looking back?
Oh goodness, get a better LSAT score, definitely. It seems, just because, you know, if you're in school, it seems like you have so many things pulling at you, and you have your classes, and you may be working, and you want a social life as well, especially it's your senior year most of the time when you're doing this. So I would have put in the adequate time to get the best LSAT score that I could. Now I'm going to date myself as well. When I took the LSAT, they were not taking the best score, they were averaging scores. So it was a little bit of a different strategy for us. You needed to go in and try to get the best score that you could, because if you took it another time and got lower, we're averaging now. So for you all, it's the best score wins. You go out there, take it. Now, law schools can see your other scores. I don't want you to ever think that they cannot, but they're looking at the highest score because that's the one that they're going to use for their rankings. So just because LSAT is important for admissions, but also from a merit-based scholarship perspective as well, what we see that students really struggle with is not so much the GPA. You all tend to do pretty well in classes across the board, but it is the LSAT that gets people tripped up most of the time. So better LSAT score.
So when we're talking about LSAT prep, do you have any insight into that? Like, because I know that there are all kinds of companies that offer prep, and they cost money, and, you know, when do I do all this? And, you know, so.
Yes, we see on average LSAT prep costs about $1,500. So that is a big price tag that you'll want to think about and hopefully start saving for. So if you celebrate birthdays or holidays, or if you're working, I know that might be a little bit challenging now, but you have those opportunities to try to save money. Absolutely do that. But there is a free resource called Khan Academy that you might want to look at, and that might be a good way to supplement as well, something else that you may be doing. So we do see that students do a little bit better if they do go ahead and do a commercial LSAT prep course, but there are different angles that you can take, and there's so many companies out there. I know people are familiar with Kaplan, but there's also 7Sage, and there's Blueprint, and so you have a number of options that you have available to you. And then also, I don't know, Leslie, if you all have any resources on campus that can help students prepare for the LSAT as well.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I believe, well, I can tell you that I used to proctor LSATs way back in the day. But yes, we have a testing center on campus that does offer LSAT delivery, and they would probably offer a lot of insight into different organizations that offer prep. So yeah, I would definitely check the testing center. Actually, the testing center and the writing center are on the same hallway together in DePaulo Hall, you guys, just for future reference. But yeah, and while we're out, or off campus, I would definitely, if you guys are interested in talking to those folks, you know, look on their website, email the folks in the office and ask them, hey, you know, I'm getting ready for this process. What can you help me with? You know, what do you all offer? And at least ask and see what they've got. So yeah.
I will also say if you are receiving an LSAC waiver for an LSAT test or the Credential Assembly Service, typically the LSAT prep companies will also offer you a discount if you're receiving a waiver from LSAC. So look for those discounts if you are a waiver recipient.
In the midst of the pandemic and all of this, could I offer a resource that I've been using as well? Before around February or so, I had bought these, they're called like the LSAT Logic Games Bible and the other Bibles basically, but it's through the company of PowerScore, and they sell like a whole trilogy of everything. And honestly, I'd recommend them. Not saying you have to use them, but it is something that I've used, plus, you know, Khan and else and Seven Sage and stuff. But PowerScore, those books, they do help. I will say that, especially in this, because we can't go to a class and all that. So
Yeah, and I suggest if you all have resources that are helping you, please share amongst yourselves. That's definitely beneficial.
Yeah, pop those in the chat. If you guys have any websites that you wanted to talk, you know, to add, please feel free to pop those in the chat to everybody, and that will be saved. So yeah.
Is anyone taking the LSAT maybe in May or June? You're doing like the LSAT Flex? Okay. All right. Good luck. Share
thank
that
you.
with all of us when you're done with that, so we can familiarize ourselves.
I actually had a webinar the other day breaking it down. They talked about how it'll be scored and how law schools will look at it. And honestly, I'm kind of thankful for the opportunity, because law schools are looking at it the same. And if for some reason it doesn't go as well as I hope, then I'll just retake a regular one. But what they did was the Flex is broken down into, they're just doing one section of each and scoring them the same, and not necessarily weighing, say, logical reasoning or whatever higher. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Leslie, for your students that are taking the Flex, the debriefing will be invaluable.
Tell me about that.
Just because it is a little bit different than the traditional LSAT, and so it's going to be virtual for one. So to see how it feels for students, how they believe that they were scoring on their practice tests versus what they actually receive for the LSAT Flex, because it's not really an apples to apples anymore. So we want to be able to see how that works out for them. So yeah, if you happen to see Trevor or reach out to him, whatever he experiences will be great information.
So we're kind of at the midway point. What questions do you guys have? Because I've got a few in mind regarding the actual law school experience. What do you guys want to know about the actual experience of being a student and a law student in law school? So I was going to say this is post admission, and you're there. It's your first year.
I was going to say, how would you compare a average law school semester compared to maybe, let's say, 18 hours for undergraduate or something, or just something of a heavy course load in undergrad compared to a typical course load in law school?
What I would say is very much different in law school than it is in undergrad is now some law schools are trying to move away from the one exam only model. But the fact is, like, of course, you still have to prepare. The amount of reading that you have to do in law school, I don't think that any undergrad course, not even in my master's program, prepared me for the amount of reading that you have to do in law school. Now, some law schools are implementing a midterm now, which we see statistically is so much better for students because this is your first year and you don't know what a law school exam feels like. It is an experience that is unlike anything else. So to give you that ability to see what type of questions, writing in an essay format, because a lot of times too in undergrad, we're answering multiple choice questions. Very rarely will you ever have a class in law school that allows you to answer in multiple choice. It will be essay questions. So the one exam, it all comes down to this test is something that is nothing like undergrad. So probably the amount of preparation that you have to put into getting ready for a class, the Socratic method. Some of you may have been in a class that already prepared you for the Socratic method, but depending upon how big your law school class is, having 200 people look back at you as you're, being drilled with questions, that is something that you definitely have to get used to as well. And then just preparing for that one exam per semester for that class. And like I said, some of them are now implementing midterms, and we just see that students do better when there are midterms, but if they still are implementing the more traditional model, you will only have that one exam. And so that's the one grade that makes or breaks you for that semester. So a lot more high stakes than maybe an undergrad, but you just have to prepare yourself for this, and that's what you're doing in undergrad. And then the curve is also something that you may want to get used to as well.
Can you talk about the curve?
Yeah, so undergrad, you probably are more familiar with, everybody in the class, if you do A work, you can get A work. Law school, it is on a bell curve. So there will be a certain amount that fall within the A range, the B range, and the C range. So not everyone in your class is going to get an A. So the professors will figure out where you fall according to that curve. But law schools do it a little bit differently. Some of them have enrollment requirements. So like any class that has 20 people or less, they're not required to do a curve. But if you have more than 20 people, you would be required to do the curve. So just check in with the law schools that you're interested in. Some law schools also don't do grades, depending upon which ones you actually are trying to get into. Some of them just do a pass-fail. And those tend to be the very much higher ranked schools as well.
Why is it that the higher ranked schools do pass-fail?
I've never asked them, but what we believe is that the caliber of students that typically gets into those law schools have demonstrated that they have an academic skill set that makes people that will hire them already feel confident in their abilities. So the grades don't make as much of a difference because they were able to get into a Harvard. Right.
This is backing up just a little bit, but one thing I had planned to do this summer was to visit some law schools, and that might not be a possibility anymore. Do you have any suggestions on getting a good feel for what a school would be like just based on their website or some other resources?
A lot of law schools are still doing virtual visits. So they'll still give you some really good information about their school that you might be interested in, but we're still connected. So that means that you can reach out to current students and you can see, especially during this COVID-19, how well supported did you feel? Were they responsive to, your concerns and the challenges that you all were experiencing? So that's really good information. But just overall for current students, what's the feel like? What's the environment? Because I also tell students it's not only where you can survive, where you can get in, but it's about where you can thrive. So you want to have an environment that's going to be conducive to what's going to allow you to be the best law student you can be, and then later on the best professional. Alumni are still another good resource because the current students are going to tell you how the school is right then and there, but the alumni can tell you how well prepared they were for the bar exam. Were they able to get employed, right after they graduated? How are career services? Even if you did struggle with getting a job right out of law school, how did career services help you as you were looking for different jobs? So yeah, definitely use the resources that the law schools themselves are putting out. Find students that are currently there, and also look at alumni as well. We also, once again, have a ton of resources. Explore JD is one. We have another one that's called Max Pre-Law, but there are tons of resources that allow you to know cost of attendance information in there. We do have another tool that's called Analytics, which is very similar to Explore JD, but every law school is required by the ABA, the American Bar Association, to put out certain information about their school. And so things like bar passage rate, employment rates, scholarship information, all of that is required to be put out by them. So that's something that's not based on what they put in their virtual tour, but real concrete, hard evidence of what they're able to do and produce for their students.
As a bit of a follow-up to that, one thing I was told before is that when you apply to a school, they know of which other schools you applied to as well. And that based on that, they would see if you applied to like one school within the state, maybe you're not as serious about going there. Or that sort of thing. Do you have thoughts on like grouping your schools geographically?
So 2 points about that. When I talk to law school professionals, that only really becomes something that they will look at is if they know you might be teetering between them and another school. Other than that, they really don't seem to care too much about where you apply. But if they know that you haven't accepted a seat anywhere because they can see where you've accepted and they think, oh, you might be teetering between this school and this school, it's really when they're looking at that type of information. I will say from a regional perspective, just because once again, Access Lex, we love our research. Statistically, we see that where you go to law school, it's where you tend to stick and stay. So because you're building your network, you are, meeting local judges and local attorneys, and you may have a job your 2L or your 3L year, but you're building a solid foundation, and that is where you will tend to stay the next 5, 10, 15 years down the line. So from a regional perspective, you want to think about, is this an area that I want to stay in and build my career? Not saying it's impossible for you to move somewhere else. And there's actually, I want to say it's a school in Iowa, I believe, because they understand that not a lot of people want to stay in the Iowa area. They allow you to do like your first 2 years on campus, and then they allow you to do your 3rd year where you actually want to practice. So just keep all of those things in mind as you're looking at law school. I think we lost Leslie.
No, I'm right here.
You just lost your picture? Okay.
Did you lose my picture?
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So, Teria, you mentioned a little bit earlier about career services and about employment. And you talked a little bit about that when we were talking about locations. What do students look for in career services for a law school and assistance with employment and with internships and all that?
Yeah, so the bare basis is that you can see what their employment statistics are. They are once again required by the American Bar Association to produce that information. But also career services, the reason that they're in those roles is because they're typically really connected locally or in the state where the law school is located. And so ask them what type of events they have. So I'm in Charlotte right now, that's where I live. So I know that there are some local schools that will do, they actually take students to the law firm so that students can meet the local attorneys, partners, build those relationships. Also, if you know, so there's on-campus interviews, if you're not familiar with that. They are opportunities typically for the higher ranked students to have interviews on campus with law firms. But also, if you're not in a city or a state that maybe houses some of the larger law firms, if that's your aspiration, I also recently heard that there's a law school that will take their students to those areas that do have larger law firms. So they're not doing on-campus interviews, but they're still not missing out on opportunities to be able to interview for those larger firms. So you want to know, how creative are you? If yes, I decide to go to Iowa to go to law school, and I understand that you can provide me with so many great resources as a student, but also what are you doing to make sure that if my aspiration is to go to a larger firm, maybe in New York or LA, how are you preparing me for that? So yeah, find out what their programming is, find out what resources they have available for you, what they've done for, previous students that, they can definitely implement for you, and then look at the facts and the figures that they're required to disclose.
Anybody have questions about placement and career services for your law schools? Lauren, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I was kind of curious about what you should think about when trying to pick a law school, like besides just like where you would want to stay, because I know that there are some like states that you might want to go to, but you might not want to go to those specific law schools, or like, so just what goes into that aspect of things.
Yeah, it's really going to be dependent upon who you are as a person and what you want to do. But I definitely think it's hard, especially if you may not have had a lot of exposure to law school or the law. I know I went into law school and a whole world of different things that you could practice in were opened up to me. But let's say you are very passionate about environmental issues or environmental law, you will want to think about a school that is ranked in that area, and that may have clinics that will give you that exposure. Some other things, so once again, I went to law school a very long time ago, and it was very much more focused on the academic aspect of learning the law and being a law student. But we understand that the practical aspects are also very important. Once you're done with law school, you want to be able to act and practice as a lawyer. So there are some schools that have come up with fantastic ideas about how to get that practical aspect in there. So not only with clinics, but since you all are in North Carolina, Elon has a very unique structure where they allow you to do, and they're on trimesters, but they have like one whole year that you just go out and work. So you're able to put that onto your resume. So look for schools that have creative ways, not only to, yes, teach you the law, because that's so important, but give you opportunities to apply the practical aspects. Also knowing yourself. I went to a very small undergrad campus college in Nashville, Tennessee for undergrad. So I knew I didn't want to be in a class of 400 1Ls. That wasn't the best fit for me. So you want a larger class versus a smaller class. I also knew I wanted to be in a metropolitan city. So, there are wonderful opportunities, like the University of Tennessee is in a very rural area, but it's a great school. So knowing those different types of things that are important to you. Once again, I plug Explore JD all the time, but Explore JD allows you to pick your top 5 priorities, and based on your priorities and how you rank them, law schools that match that criteria come up. And it'll give you some additional information about them.
And anything you? So I'm curious, the media and entertainment clearly has a perspective on what it's like to be a law student. Some that clearly that, you know, that may be a little bit alike, but lots of them that are not. Can you describe and of course they're going to vary, but what do I need to look for in terms of ambiance? I mean, what ambiance and like when I go to a visit, on a visit to like an in-person visit to a campus, what about the ambiance and the feel of the campus do you think stands out, or that students could look for?
One thing I would definitely say are facilities. Now that will go into play with maybe the cost a little bit as well. But if you've been in a courtroom recently, they are very high tech now. So you want to make sure that you're getting some experience with some of those newer courtrooms. So you may have a little bit of an advantage. Also, what type of staff they have available. Academic support is immensely important, you know, to make sure that you are getting the best, you know, opportunities you can. Sometimes we realize that we may not learn like everyone else, so you may want to have someone there that allows you the opportunity to figure it out, but that can also be academic support. What else about ambiance that you can look for on campus? Honestly, a lot of law schools look very similar because they have a very similar setup, but also, you know, how students, you know, seem to feel about the campus. Just being able to, you know, stop one of them, see where they kind of, what kind of spaces are made available to them to study. You will spend a great amount of time in the library. Look at the library facilities. Not so much, you know, no one's really checking out books anymore, but, you know, it's really a good place for you to study, you know, have study groups as well. And you want to make sure that that environment is welcoming for you to be a part of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, one of the questions on my sheet over here. Tell us a little bit about housing for law students.
Yeah, we get this question a lot, only because a lot of people think it's very similar to undergrad. It is not. A lot of schools will not have graduate housing, so you will need to secure your own housing before you actually start classes. If they do by chance have graduate housing, that's when another financial perspective comes into play, because that graduate housing typically is going to come with a meal plan that's kind of required. They're usually hand in hand. And that can be a lot more costly than if you were to find your own place to live. Maybe you have a roommate or two, that cuts down on costs. Maybe you find a cheaper place to live, and you're also able to buy your own groceries. So even if they do have graduate housing, it may be better from a financial perspective to be able to secure your own housing and make your own food and those type of choices for your own.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see.
I have another question real quick. So I'm a little bit indecisive. I think I've changed my major twice at this point. When you look at law students, is that something they typically experience as well? Like they picture themselves practicing one type of law and then one semester and they're switching? Is that pretty common?
So unlike undergrad, you don't declare a type of law that you're interested in. So unless you tell someone, no one would actually know that you came in wanting to do criminal law and then you ended up wanting to do corporate law. So no one would actually know that. But absolutely, like there's just so many different types of law out there. Once again, I'm going to date myself, but e-discovery was not a thing before I went to law school. And because we had all of this electronic data now, there was an entire field dedicated to it at that point. Also, we hear a lot of students that are interested in cannabis law at this point, which once again was not a huge factor just a few years ago. So there's always new things that are happening that you may not have never thought about as being a career choice. And some people also go into law school thinking that they absolutely want to do corporate law or bankruptcy law or tax law. Then you take a tax law course and you're like, this is not for me at all. So yes, there is opportunity throughout the 3 years to figure out what might be a best fit for you. And there's no shame in, changing what you thought you wanted to do to what you actually would like to do in your future.
Teria, I know that we talked a little bit about in the beginning about doing research on law firms and even on alumni from law schools. What is your take on these students using LinkedIn for their searching and kind of potentially doing information interviews in particular with alumni, et cetera?
Absolutely.
Using LinkedIn in particular.
I like LinkedIn. It is a way that you don't necessarily have to go through the law school to say like, hey, do you have some names of people that I might be willing to speak to? Also, because they're probably going to give you the names of people that are going to give them a glowing review. So LinkedIn is a way that you can say, oh, I see that you're an alumni. And it's not very intrusive. You send them a message, either they decide to reply to you or they don't. But that is one way to get hopefully an unbiased review of what the law school is really able to offer you and what that experience is like. So I love LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if any University of Cincinnati potentials want to reach out to me, I have no problem letting them know that. And even if I'm not the right person for you to speak to for maybe one of the clinics that they have, I may know a person that would be a better resource, and I'm more than happy to connect. So LinkedIn is an invaluable resource, probably much better suited than some of the other social connection applications that you could use.
And heads up, guys, if you all are looking for a person to take a look at your LinkedIn before you begin this process of going into law school, because people will look you up too. That's for sure, right? Let me know, and I'm very happy to help you with that. And we are also doing an event during this week for LinkedIn as well. In fact, what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is ask just if there's one last question. We've got about 7 minutes. So I want to take maybe the last couple of minutes to talk about the week going forward. So does anybody have any last questions? I don't want to rush anybody, but what about, so we talked about the kind of the beginning, the middle, and the end of law school. What about, it's 6 months out and here come my financial aid, if I'm on financial aid, here come my, my payments. So tell us a little bit about, I know we did a program on that, Teria, last fall. It was wonderful on the kind of financial commitment of law school. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so typically you will have a 6-month grace period before you have to pay back your student loans. And so I will be very transparent that most law students do pay for their legal education through loans. So after that grace period is exhausted, you have so many options on how you repay them. It can be overwhelming. As Leslie said, we do in person, but we also do webinars about loan repayment. And it talks about, luckily they do give you 2 categories. One is very much like a mortgage or a car payment, but the other one is income-driven repayment plans. And there's a number of options that you can choose there. It also becomes a strategy. Are you going into public interest? And that means that you have to be pushed towards this way. Are you going into maybe big law where you'll have a higher salary? So maybe you want to think about these options. But once again, we do an hour presentation about that. We do an hour presentation about public service loan forgiveness. If that's something you're interested in, it is real. You can qualify for it. You can get your loans forgiven. But there are definitely some pieces of the puzzle that have to be there in order to qualify. And as I mentioned, if you go to accesslex.org/max-pre-law, you can sign up for our webinars there. They're very much like this. They're interactive. You can ask your questions. And also through Max Pre-Law, if you want to talk to me they have 30-minute windows about any question you'll have about your application, financial aid. I also used to do residency, a lot of things since law school. But So hopefully that's made me well suited to answer a lot of your questions. But you can also set up a coaching call with myself or other colleagues. So this doesn't have to be it.
What was that website again?
It's accessflex.org/max-pre-law, one word.
And folks, just so you know, law school day for this coming up fall semester is the 2nd of November. We've already put the date down, so you might want to make note of that. And we're going to have Teria come back to campus, hopefully, if we're out on campus, which I think we will be. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we'll be back, yes. And so, but we are also going to be kind of planning a backup virtual event too. So you will be taken care of in terms of law school, types of activities. So please don't feel like, oh, it's done. I'm never going to see it. You'll see something coming from me. Don't worry about that. But yeah. Any burning desires? Any other questions you need to ask? Because we're getting down to about 3 minutes left. Okay. I'm gonna share my screen right quick and show you the rest of the events for the week. So you guys are in the know about that. So let me just pull this real quick. And so you'll be able to see, this is just a little a spreadsheet I put together with all the dates. So I think that some really excellent ones for you guys might be, there's one today at 1 o'clock that I'm doing about harnessing Handshake, which is our central resource on campus we use for posting jobs and internships. Remote work best practices. There's another Ask Me Anything that's the same kind of format as this is, and the Handshake one about resumes and cover letters. So that might be something interesting for you guys to do. Maximizing internships, job search tips. We're doing an event called Resumania where you can actually come to that. It's sort of like a drop-in time for resume reviewing. We talked a little bit about LinkedIn earlier, and so there'll be a presentation on that virtually on the 23rd. We've got alternatives to internships during COVID-19, and then virtual interview etiquette. So we've got you guys covered in terms of events that are happening this week. And so that is all going to be on our website, and it's all inside of Handshake. So you are more than welcome to go into Handshake and register if you like. Otherwise, you'll probably see some invitations coming out from our staff to, when we send invitations to events like this, and I think Trevor saw my email come through. We have ways of discovering who, like for example, the med school one, Ricky, who's my coworker, will look and see who at UNCW has a desire to go to med school, and we'll only email those people. So the entire student body did not get the email that Trevor got, just, people that told us that he wanted to go to law school. So, or they want to go to law school. So just a heads up on that. But any last thoughts, Teria, about this?
No, but good luck with everything. And hopefully I do see you in November.
No, I know we had such a good time last time you were here. And so, yeah, but she'll be here hopefully in the flesh, and so will all of us, and we can get together. And I know that there are students on campus that are getting ready to put together the pre-law society. So I'm gonna do some digging and find out who that person is, and I can forward all that info on to you guys. Okay, if you're interested. So great. All righty.
All right.
Well,
Thank you all
that's
so
it,
much.
guys.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
It was great seeing everybody. You guys have a great afternoon.
You
You
as well.
too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Teria.
Bye. Thanks, Leslie.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.